lunch, just getting to have lunch. Say that life's too short to hate your job. Go and be free and be happy. You know, I really like my job and I'm pretty living my best life.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Leaving Med. Today we are lucky to chat to Grace, who used to be a doctor but now works in the medical devices industry as a medical writer. She left 5 years ago, so we're going to find out how it's been going over the last 5 years and if she's glad she made the move. So let's just jump right in. So what stage were you at in your medical career when you decided to leave?
So I was mid F1, so very, very early on. I'd done my first rotation, which was hell. It was diabetes and endocrinology, which, as I'm sure most medics know, is a bit of a dumping ground for anything and everything. So, you know, we regularly had 40 patients on the list, and sometimes you'd get in and you were the only doctor on the rota, and you're doing a ward round and you're just like, this is not safe, this is horrible. And I just hated it. I dreaded going to work every day. I was so, as I'm sure a lot of people will relate to, I felt so disappointed every day that every patient I'd seen had subpar care, basically, because I was running around like a headless chicken. But you even by going above and beyond, you're never giving those patients the care they deserve. So I think that is just so, you feel so defeated all the time. And, you know, everyone says F1's horrible and you've just got to get through the first few years. And so I'd done my first rotation. Then I was midway. I'd started my second rotation, which was psych. And I think it was mainly that first rotation that had led to me wanting to leave. But I'd kind of been keep going, get onto psych because psych will be chill because everyone just says psych's an easy job. And actually it was kind of challenging in its own way. The patients were really challenging. And by that point, I just was so burnt out that I didn't have anything in the tank to deal with sort of aggressive patients and stuff like that. So the way it all went down was that I had a meeting with my supervisor, who was my consultant from the first job. And she said, how's it going? Because I was on psych by that point. And I just burst into tears. And I just said, you know, like, I hate it. I dread going to work. She was amazing, actually. She has she had such a huge influence on me leaving, which sounds counterintuitive because she was my supervisor, but she could see how unhappy I was. And I remember her sort of asking me, can you remember why you wanted to be a doctor? And I literally couldn't even tell her. And she said, what you're actually interested in? And I said, like, I always wanted to be an archaeologist. and I said that, you know, what my interests were and stuff. And it was never science or medicine. You know, I just picked it as a job when I was 16. So she basically said, you know, you don't have to do it. And she actually first, she said, why don't you have some time off? So I was essentially off on sick for a bit. And she was like, I was like, I can't because then there'll be one doctor down on the ward and, you know, I'm fine. I don't need to go on sick leave. And she was like, just take the time off. You're obviously like in a hole and then see how you feel. So yes, that was, I'm digressing, but that was the point I was at, kind of mid F1.
So you went off sick and then did you immediately start looking at other jobs or like
Not
what was
really.
the time scale?
Yeah, so I think I left, would it have been maybe like January or something? Can't quite remember. And then I had like regular meetings with I kept in contact with my supervisor, but I had meetings with the guy who was the head of F1s in Sheffield. And I don't think I started looking for jobs, but I felt immediately better not being at work, obviously. And the only thing remaining was that I felt dread at the thought of going back. And I distinctly remember I'm saying this to my mum, like, basically, yes, I feel better, but I've got to go back. And she was like, you know, you don't have to do it. you don't have to go back. And that was like a massive revelation to me, because all along I'd been thinking, well, yes, I'm having this bit of time off and that's great, but I'm stuck in this. Like, this is what I've chosen. I'd never even considered it was an option to not do it, because, you know, everyone says, oh, all that training and, you know, all those years of medicine and uni. And but my mum saying, you know, you don't have to do it, was a huge turning point. And her saying to me, you know, you could not go back. That felt like an instant weight lifted, like as if I don't have to go back into that hospital. Oh my God, that would be the best thing to ever happen in the whole world. So then I started obviously thinking, what else could I do? And I can't remember how I got it, whether it was through, it can't have been through the NHS. I think it was through my old uni. You can still access career services if you've not long graduated, like a couple of years after you graduated or something. So like I did that, I went and saw like a career person, and I don't know how helpful that was really, because I've obviously ended up staying vaguely medical, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But that was one thing. I had a few more meetings with my supervisor, with the head of F1, and they were obviously all like, are you sure? Are you sure? And I was like, yes. But I didn't have a job lined up or anything. So, you know, that was very scary. And as I'm sure we'll come on to, a lot of people were saying, don't do it, you know, it's a mistake and everything. So, yeah, that was where I was at that point. And then once I'd officially, well, no, I think I hadn't officially done they all kept saying, just kind of don't make any decisions. So I felt really bad that I was on sick leave, because you feel like you don't, you know, look like you're some sort of fraud, and like, you know, I don't deserve to be getting paid because I'm not working. And, you know, they're short on the wards. But the guy who was like the head of F1 and a couple of other people who I was having these meetings with, they just kept saying, you don't need to make a decision. They were obviously scared that I was saying, I don't want to go back. And they kept saying, you know, just draw it out a bit longer, see if you change your mind. And eventually I was like, no, I'm definitely not coming back. So we did all of the, I don't know, paperwork, finalising me leaving. I had to do a letter of resignation. And then I was like, right, better get a job. So I was actually quite fortunate that it was mid-COVID. So I ended up doing this job where I was phoning people to see if they needed the food boxes, you know, and they're sending out food boxes to vulnerable people.
Right.
And it was just a filler job, but it was really good money because of the way things were in COVID. Like, they were just like throwing money at things, weren't they? And I literally just walked from my house down to this, like, it's kind of like in a call center building. And it was obviously dead easy. Most of the time we weren't even doing anything. We were just sat there while we were waiting for them to give us the number, like the numbers and the contact details of the people that we were going to ring. So there was loads of just downtime. Everyone just sat chatting. I was getting paid probably comparable to what I was as an F1. I did that for a couple of months, and I was blissfully happy, because it was, I'd left medicine. All my friends were still doing it and hating it. It was sunny. I was walking to work each day. I was working like, I don't know, 9 till 4 or something. And it just felt like, I just felt so happy. And then this job, which when I moved into medical devices, which is the field that I'm in now, that job just came up, and I'd basically been scrolling on the job app Indeed constantly, looking under like science, looking under healthcare, like they have categories, and applying for anything and everything. I applied for like some random research jobs at the uni. I applied for some sort of like apprenticeshipy thing at a steel company. Like, I was just applying for everything and thinking like, well, what's the harm? Writing loads of CVs and stuff. And then this job came up one day, and it said, looking for a F1 or F2 level doctor to offer a clinical input to all aspects of our company. And I was like, well, that's got my name on it. So I was very fortunate that came along at the right time. I literally, I think I'd already got a CV ready. So I just wrote a little cover letter, sent it off. And the MD of the company phoned me about half an hour later saying, when can you come in? And I went like the next day or something, had an interview, and they rang me like straight away saying, when do you want to start? This is what we're going to pay you. And obviously that other job was just a filler, so I didn't need to give notice or anything. So I just started that, and then I've been in that industry ever since.
Wow. I mean, there's so much there, really. Like, I mean, it was amazing that your mum was supportive, that your supervisor was supportive.
Yeah.
Um,
I honestly think if I had had a different supervisor, I'd still be doing it now and hating it,
yeah.
because she was just this amazing woman, and she just could see I was really unhappy, and she was one of those people that can understand that medicine shouldn't be your whole life, and it's not the be all and end all. And she just looked at me and just said, like, I think she even said something like, as a joke, like, I release you. you know I'm allowing you to go and be free and be happy. And she was incredible. That made a huge difference. I think if I'd had a really kind of old fashioned, for want of a better word, supervisor who just said, you know, you need to stick it out, I would have just gone, okay, yeah, I'll just
Yeah.
stick it out.
And it's like fighting that sunk cost fallacy of, I've put in 5 years or, or
Yeah,
longer, and you're like, oh, I don't want to waste all those years. And, oh, everyone's telling you, oh, it'll get better in a few years. Like, everyone
yeah,
struggles with F1. And it's hard to know how much of that struggle is just being an F1 and how much of that is like it's not right for you and you can choose to be happier.
yeah.
Um,
And I think as well, everybody loves to say, oh, it'll get better, it'll get better, but my my friends that are still doing it, like, yes, maybe it's a bit better because they're more confident, and obviously that aspect, your medical ability improves, so you don't feel like you're out of your depth all the time. But they still have the same struggles in a lot of the other areas. Like, they still might not have time to have lunch, and they still have to work nights, and they still have short staffing issues. And a lot of the stresses, I don't think, go away as you move up. I think you do improve your medical knowledge, obviously, but and also the higher up you get, the more responsibility you have, which was the thing I felt. It's all very well saying, oh, when you're a med reg, you'll earn loads of money and you'll be really skilled and proficient, but you're also the most senior person in the hospital overnight, and I can't even imagine that kind of pressure and responsibility. So I don't really agree with the argument that it'll get better, because I don't
yeah,
necessarily think it does.
yeah. And like now I'm doing GP training, and yeah, I'm getting more confident, and I'm getting better, but at the same time you're just expected to see more patients, and
Yeah,
so you're always squeezed to the maximum
yeah.
working potential that they can
You're
get out
getting,
of you.
yeah, exactly. You're getting better, but then more is expected of you.
Yeah.
The only good thing about F1 really is that they don't expect a lot of you. So it's horrible, but
Yeah.
actually at the end of the day, if something went wrong, then you're not really responsible for that patient at the end of the day. It's still the consultant's responsibility. That's kind of the only saving grace in F1, isn't it?
Yeah. And also, it sounds like because you are F1 and you weren't on a bigger salary, it almost made the jump to the start of a lot of other industry, pay wise, an
For
easier
sure.
jump. Like
Yeah,
you started
that's
working a minimum wage job, and it's not really that different to the pay of an F1.
no. No, I mean, that filler job was kind of fine for money, and because it was like an hourly rate, I don't even know how it compared. But then the first job I started on, because I had gone from psych, which was base salary, no out of hours, I actually had a pay rise when I left, which obviously wouldn't be the case for someone further up, probably. So although everybody said it was, leaving too soon and stuff, from that perspective, it was the best time to leave, because I had a pay rise rather than a pay cut when I left.
And it's easy to, as you go up the scales in medicine, inflate your lifestyle costs accordingly. And then you're like, well,
Exactly.
how can I go from such and such salary and go back down? Like, I don't know how I would afford it.
Yeah,
So you can get trapped in that sense.
definitely. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things for, yeah, people further on who ask me, how can I get into what you're doing? And they 100% could, but I don't know if they could jump onto the level I'm at 4 years on, because I've got significantly more experience over the last 4 years, and I've had significant pay rises. So it's not that straightforward jumping at this level, I think. So kind of earlier the better. And like you said about the sunk cost fallacy, if you're staying because you think you've put too much time in, if you stay for another year, you've put even more time in. So actually, I know it's such a difficult thing to say, but if you think it's not for you, then which is easier said than done to just know that, but then earlier the better, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's when you start to maybe hope you catch a cold so that you don't have to go in.
Yeah,
You're like, I actually
genuinely.
enjoy my sick leave more than I do my work.
Oh
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that's
Please
probably
let me get DMV.
yeah, please, norovirus.
Yeah, 100%.
So going into that job, what was the job?
So my job title then was clinical project scientist, and it was quite a vague job description. I don't think they really knew what they wanted. So it was a company that makes medical devices, extracorporeal life support, so ECMO and the bypass circuit when you're having cardiac surgery. That was their medical equipment that they were manufacturing, and they wanted, well, as the job advert said, a medic, but a lower down one, so they didn't have to pay them as much, I guess. A medic to offer clinical input. So a lot of that is the regulatory side of things. You need a lot of documentation to support putting a medical device or keeping a medical device on the market. Clinical evaluation reports, which is now my main job, and things like the instructions for use that come with a device, that needs to have appropriate input from a clinical perspective to see that it makes sense to the user. Some devices need patient leaflets, or you need a risk management file on a device. So you kind of need a clinical input to determine what are the actual clinical risks of this, what could go wrong, how do we prove that it's safe and it does what it says on the tin. But then also they wanted kind of a clinical input to sales and marketing as well. So if you're putting out a brochure, does this, are these marketing claims substantiated by clinical literature, or do we need to do a clinical investigation? Can we do a post-market clinical study? And training as well. So that I did a lot of training for sales. They had 4 new sales reps at one point, and I did quite a lot of anatomy and physiology training for them. So it was very, oh, and also the testing of the devices. They used to get pig's blood from an abattoir to test the devices in a kind of lab environment, because it was an oxygenator. So you needed to test how well the device was actually oxygenating the blood. So they used pig's blood, and then you could run the samples through an ABG machine to do your testing to prove that it does work and stuff like that, and hemolysis that was happening in the device and centrifuging it down and stuff like that. So it was really varied. And I don't think they really knew what they wanted, so I could mold the job to what I wanted. In the end, it became mostly the regulatory side, because that's where they really needed the support. And I pretty much became a medical writer, you would call it. So writing clinical evaluation reports, which is now my main role, which are big, chunky essays, basically where you summarize all of the safety and performance behind a medical device and prove or substantiate that you're meeting the requirements of the regulations. By doing literature searches, or by getting your own clinical data, or assessing how many complaints you've had and that kind of thing. So that's my main role now, yeah. But that was my first job, which was a little bit more all over the place.
And how were those first few months, transitioning?
Amazing.
The main differences.
Best thing I've ever done. Yeah, when I read your message about what you're going to ask, and you said what were the main differences, And we were laughing last night because I was saying to my other half, like, lunch, just getting to have lunch, which he thought was ridiculous, but he's not a medic. Getting to have lunch every day, finishing on time every day, not doing nights, not doing out of hours, having every weekend free. If someone says, do you want to do something next month on a Saturday? Yes. Like, I don't need all of my other friends. I have to say, oh, I have to look at my rota, not sure. I never have to work a night shift again. I hated nights. And I think as well, because I've gone from F1, where you very much are the bottom of the heap, aren't you, to being somebody that people really respected my opinion. So that was kind of a real switch from going to being from being in F1, where you're not very confident and people don't necessarily value your opinion, or you don't feel like you have much to offer, maybe, to being someone that I felt really useful. I felt like I was really valued, and like I was really making a difference to stuff day to day. And just that kind of feeling of having enough time to do a task to the best of your ability. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I think I always hated the fact, like I said a bit before, all those people that you're seeing, you're not doing a thorough job, and you're not, and that's really hard for most people. I think that you're always doing the bare minimum, whereas, I mean, obviously I still have deadlines, and I can't do everything to the perfectionist amount, but I feel like I have enough time to really consider things and do a good job, I suppose.
Yeah, I definitely struggle with perfectionism in GP land, because you just sort
Yeah.
of got to bish
10
bash
minutes.
bosh,
Yeah. What
do
can
what
you do
you
in 10
can.
minutes?
And do you think that, so apart from being a doctor, did you have any other advantages or anything special on your CV or anything you did at med school to give you an advantage when getting that job?
No, I don't think so. I didn't do anything extra at med school. I just did the bare minimum, to be honest, to get through. Well, no, that sounds awful. I mean, it was enough to do the bare minimum at med school, wasn't it? Just to pass your exams and stuff.
Yeah.
No, I never did anything extra that would contribute at all. And I don't think I needed to have. To them, the fact that I had a medical degree was all it took. I think now I do think it's an advantage that I'm quite good at writing, and I never would have considered that before. But actually, I loved history and English at school. I've always been quite good at those SAE subjects, and I'm quite. It sounds really like cocky. Like I'm quite. I can write well, and that's been a huge advantage. And I'd never really thought about it until, like, I was talking to a friend who's still in medicine and isn't very happy, and I said, would you think about doing something like me? And she said that she doesn't like writing and she's not very good at writing. So I suppose that's an advantage, but that's not, when you're writing sort of scientifically, that's not the be all and end all. When you read journal articles sometimes and you think this is written terribly. So I don't think that's the be all and end all. That's the only advantage I could think of, really, is that I enjoy writing, and I enjoy, you have to do quite a lot of sort of justification. So if your notified body, the person that kind of grants the CE mark to be allowed to sell the device, the notified body will review your documentation, and if they feel it's not sufficient, you then have to respond to them. And I find that quite satisfying, coming up with a good argument. It's a bit like being a lawyer, and you're kind of justifying why you feel that you have met the requirement. So I quite enjoy that as well.
And sort of, so you started off in this new industry. How did the pay compare when you started out, and how has it progressed over the last 5 years that you've been working in this industry?
I think, like I said at the beginning, I was very lucky that I had a slight pay rise, because I'd gone from a base salary F1 psych job. So I had a little bit of an increase at that point. And then I've been quite fortunate to have quite significant jumps up in salary, both within companies and when I've moved jobs, so that as far as I know, I've stayed pretty comparable with friends at the same level. Obviously, it's quite hard to compare because most of my friends have done F3s, or they've gone to New Zealand, or they've gone to Australia. I'm sure the New Zealand, Australia salaries are much higher. But as in terms of UK standard medicine, probably now at this stage, comparable to friends who are in kind of the early stages of specialty training, probably a bit less than some of the specialties that have loads of out of hours work. But then they're probably doing twice as many hours as me. So,
And you have your
and there's,
sanity.
yeah, and there's definitely a lot of scope to move up quite significantly. So I can't see that I'll ever be earning significantly less than medic friends, if I put it that way, unless they become orthopedic surgeons doing a ton of private work and working full time. I'm probably never going to earn that kind of money.
Yeah.
But unless I like have shares in a company or become an owner of a company or something, there is obviously scope in any industry to earn that much money.
Yeah.
I don't particularly have those ambitions, but I think I will. I earn a decent salary. I'm comfortable. So yeah, comparable, I would say.
And I presume you've been able to stay where you want in the country rather
Yeah.
than moving around in search of jobs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that first job I got was a 40-minute commute. So not ideal, but fairly standard. And then they actually paid for me to do a master's. So they gave me 2 days a week to do the master's. So those 2 days I ended up working from home, which was great. So then I was only commuting 40 minutes, 3 days a week. And I was still earning the same salary to work 3 days a week and get a master's paid for. So that was incredibly fortunate. And it was really interesting. It was in medical toxicology. So that was really interesting. And it was another string to my belt in terms of medical devices and in the industry. And then the next job that I got, so I was at that first job for 3 years, and then I got a new job, lots of different reasons, really. But that was a slight salary increase as well. And that was an orthopedic company. And that was in Sheffield, which is where I live. So that was about a 20-minute commute. So that was really nice. And that was hybrid. So 3 days in the office, 20-minute commute, and then 2 days at home. But there's and in cities, there's quite a few medical device companies that I think you probably wouldn't, depending on where you live, you probably wouldn't struggle to find somewhere in this kind of industry. And then I worked there for a year, and then I've recently started a new job. When did I start? October, I think. And it's totally remote, which is rogue. I was really unsure about it. The job, I interviewed for it, and the job sounded really good. And the only thing on my negatives list was remote working, because I like the office environment. I like having a chat while you're making a cup of tea, and I like bouncing ideas off and stuff. So I was really, really unsure. The nearest office is in Ripon, which is North Yorkshire, so it's about an hour and a half. So I can go if I want to, but I've only been twice since I started, I think. And actually, I'm loving it. And I really didn't expect to be saying that. But now totally remote. So now that I know that, if I ever did want to move, I mean, I'm really happy in this new job. But now I think if I ever did want to move, I am now kind of the world's my oyster. A lot of the roles doing what I'm doing are remote. So I could work for a company in Europe, or I could work for a US company. So it's now location isn't an issue at all.
And at the moment, what does a day in the life look like?
So my main role, like I said before, is writing clinical evaluation reports. So I'll have, at the moment, our schedule is we do one of those over 3 months. So you kind of like working on something for a really long period of time. So like the device I was doing from October to Christmas was a nasolacrimal intubation kit. So a tear duct stent, basically. So the good thing about the new company is it's really varied. So I was doing a lot of kind of that area of anatomy before Christmas. And then I've just started I'll be starting a new one, which is basically a fat filter for mostly cosmetic procedures, where they take the fat from one area of the body, it goes into this canister, it gets kind of filtered out, and then it re-injected in things like breast reconstruction. So really varied. So yeah, typical day, I'd be working on that. So that might involve doing literature searches on PubMed and Embase and looking at Cochrane reviews, and it might be analysing internal company data, like summarising the sales and any complaints we've had. At my old company in orthopedics, there was a bit more what we call post-market clinical follow-up. So we had a lot of ongoing studies, which is more common in orthopedics. So you might be analysing clinical study data, basically, and a bit more stats, maybe. And yeah, writing those reports is basically my main job. But my role now is a little bit more senior. So I've gone from, so I was clinical project scientist first, then my last job was other way around actually. The first job was clinical scientist, then clinical project scientist at the orthopedic company. And then now my role is senior medical writer. So I'm sort of, there's the clinical manager, and then there's me, and then there's some more junior team members. So I'm doing a lot more kind of mentoring, which I really enjoy. So I have a lot of calls. Yesterday and the day before, I was doing training for the team. So I was had like a couple of hours where I kind of had 3 of my junior colleagues on a Teams call, and I was doing a bit of an intro into how you do your literature searches and your CER and things like that. And then, if my manager's working on something and she wants a bit of input, then we'll have discussions about stuff. So I have quite a lot of calls. I'm going down rabbit holes, aren't I? You asked about a typical day.
No, that's
Typical
useful.
day. So my office is where I'm now, up in my attic. So I'll literally so I start at 8 o'clock, answer some emails, answer some Teams messages, do a bit of the CER, then maybe have a meeting with the whole team to discuss what everybody's working on. We've recently been updating the templates that we write the documents on. So we might have a 2-hour meeting where we get the template up and we all discuss how we should change it. Then I might do a bit more on my report, and then I might have a coffee call with one of my colleagues and just like have a catch up. And then I might have another project ongoing at the same time, something like I was working with my manager on defining the human body contact, kind of the text of the human body contact areas for each of our products, because there's hundreds. So we might have a meeting to go through some of those and bash out some ideas about, is this body contacting or non-body contacting, and that kind of thing. And then, so it's quite varied, but I'm sat at the same place all day, which I know a lot of people would hate, but I really like that continuity. And I know what I'm going to be doing most days pretty much, which I like, which I found stressful in medicine. The kind of the not knowing what you're going to get each day.
So a lot of reading, a lot of writing. At uni, I feel like I avoided all sort of literature reviews and all that. It felt like
Yeah.
extra stuff that you could do. Like, but it sounds like you hadn't done much of that either at
No.
uni. So did you just learn it all as you went along?
Yeah, pretty much. We didn't have many essays. I think most med schools are the same. You don't really do much in the way of like essay writing and stuff. So I had used PubMed, but I didn't really. I learned a lot of it on the job, which was hard at times, because ideally you'd go into a company where they had someone doing it and you would kind of get training. And I didn't really have that, because that first company I went into, they didn't have anyone really doing that clinical role. So I had to sort of self-teach how to write these clinical evaluation reports. But I've now had like 4 years of doing it. So I've just kind of learned. And like I said, you get feedback from your notified body. about whether you're kind of compliant, and then you justify your methodology back to them. And then a lot of what I've learned is toing and froing from them. So I can say, well, I don't do it this way because BSI, the notified body, told me that wasn't right. So it was a bit of trial and error at times. But no, I hadn't really got experience in that. It's self-taught in a lot of ways.
And so for someone listening who likes the sound of working from home, working on a project, what and who wanted to go into this field, is there anything you'd recommend they do, or how would you recommend they go about sort of the job hunt?
I don't think there is anything really that you can do other than, I suppose, doing a bit of reading on the regulations. So the main thing we comply with is the medical device regulation, which is a fairly new European regulation, which says everything that you have to have for a medical device on the market. And a lot of my job is because that came in. So there used to be a much less stringent thing called the Medical Device Directive, which was more like a guideline in Europe. But then there was a lot of scandals like the breast implant scandal where the silicone was leaching out because they'd used industrial grade silicone. And then there was an issue where they found that metal on metal hip resurfacing was causing metallosis. So there's kind of a couple of things that happened which made the industry change quite dramatically. And that's really opened up this huge scope for more clinical people in companies. So I think probably 10 years ago, a medical device company could get by perfectly well without having anybody with any clinical knowledge or even doing my job. Probably a regulatory person could just write the document and say, these are the risks and stuff. Whereas now in the new regulation, there are specific requirements about, well, it's more stringent on who has to write these documents. You have to have medical knowledge, and that's really expanded the scope for people like me. And it came at a really good time for me because it's made these jobs exist. I mean, for example, the team I work on now, there's been 4 new members of the team this year. So the team's like doubled in size. So I would say, other than kind of having an understanding of the fact that there is a medical device regulation, so that if you went to an interview, you could, you could say that you know what it is. But I think, like we touched on earlier, the only difficulty for people would be that they may need to go like to start from the bottom, because you can't really get around the fact that you do just have to learn about how to write these types of documents, and that's quite a long process of learning. They're quite complex documents, and getting to understand the regulation, getting to understand the requirements just takes a while. So I don't think somebody could jump straight into the role I'm in, basically. But there is probably scope elsewhere in the industry, for example, in sales, if that's something, personally, it's not something I've ever been interested in. And I, in hindsight, quite enjoy not having that much personal interaction. Don't get me wrong, I like being sociable, but I used to get tired of the whole, hello, I'm Grace, I'm the doctor, how are you? Like all of that, kind of putting on that front all the time. But if people love that side of it, medical sales, from what I understand, is very lucrative. There's a huge commission basis on it. That might be something that you could sideline into and not have to kind of start from scratch. I mean, I assume you would still have to start from the bottom, wouldn't you? But I honestly can't think of anything that would help to say that you've done it, because it's not like other than saying you know how to do literature searches, which most people have an understanding from uni, and talking about your knowledge of your medical background. That's kind of all you need, and then learning to write these documents is very much on the job.
That's really helpful. And so the entry-level job title is clinical scientist in the medical device field? Is that?
Yeah, medical device industry is what I work in. Job titles: clinical scientist, clinical project scientist, medical writer, CER writer, clinical writer. And that's kind of within the regulatory area of the business. So in a medical device company, you have like your, I don't know, your engineering department, your sales department, your kind of quality and regulatory department is sort of where we sit, but we're a branch of that, I would say. So that's what I'm in. I don't know much about the pharmaceutical industry, but I assume that there is comparable kind of roles. But I think in pharma you'd have more sciencey roles where you probably need to have done biochem and things like that to actually do a lot, because we don't really have a lot of pharmacology in medical, not as much as pharmacy and biochem, I don't think. But there must be, I know that pharma has a version of these documents I write, so a clinical evaluation, some sort of clinical evaluation report. So I imagine there is scope in that industry too, but I don't have any knowledge of it. Another aspect would be working for the regulators more. So rather than working for the manufacturer, people have said to me before about working for the notified body, which I mentioned, who are actually deciding whether or not you can sell it. They're like the regulator, or the MHRA, which is kind of above them. So the MHRA control the notified body, and then the notified bodies decide on a manufacturer basis whether you can get your certification. So there's definitely roles at the MHRA, but you'd probably go from something like I was doing, move up to working for a notified body, and then kind of work for the MHRA. But I don't know if there's scope there for people who've got more senior in medicine, maybe that they could jump into something like that easier. And then the other thing is kind of contractors. So a lot of manufacturers outsource these kind of documents and this sort of work. So there are consultancy sort of firms who pay people like me to write these reports. So you're kind of you're an outsourced function, and they potentially pay better because they're a consultant. So there is different types of roles, and a lot of it, I was very lucky that job came along at the right time, I think. So yeah, it's just getting your foot in the door probably a lot of the time.
That's really helpful. So, for someone who is currently working as a doctor, dreading going to work every day, really feels a bit helpless, what would you say to them?
I would just say that life's too short to hate your job, to be honest. That's just what I kept saying to people. Life really is too short to dread going to work. I used to feel sick in the morning. Sometimes I didn't have any breakfast because I felt sick. Like didn't always sleep very well because I was just dreading work or worrying about work. I know people just say, oh, well, being a doctor's hard. And if you're really passionate about it, then maybe it's worth all of that. But I wasn't. So I think I'd kind of gone through med school ruling out most specialties, kind of ended up on GP, and then thought, actually, everything I like about GP you can't do in 10 minutes. And that kind of made me feel like, what am I actually waiting for? So I had friends who were hating it too, but they had this goal at the end. I really want to be, I don't know, an orthopedic surgeon, or I really want to be a pediatrician. So it's worth all this horribleness to get to that. But or go to Australia and New Zealand. If you love the job but you hate the NHS, then I guess try Australia and New Zealand. But is that a long-term solution? If you if you're aiming for a particular specialty which you think is for you, radiology or something maybe, then stick it out and get to that if you can. But if you aren't really sure why I honestly can't even, I couldn't even remember what I'd said in that, interview question, why do you want to be a doctor? I'd made up something. Like, I wasn't passionate about it. I wasn't one of those people who says, I've wanted to be a doctor since I was 5 years old. Not at all. I just picked it when I was 16 and I didn't know what a workplace looked like. So I just don't think that it's worth. There's other jobs out there. You could do something like I do. You could go and be a teacher. You could go and do something completely different. You're going to be doing this. We're all going to be working till we're like 70. So what is the point in dreading going to work? And people were saying to me, just get through F1. But like another 6 months of dreading going to work and feeling sick about it, that is a long time. It's not that simple. I think potentially people who aren't doing it, potentially parents or friends or whatever, oh, just stick it out for a year. A year's a long time to dread going to work. So I think people feel as well, just another thing to say is that people think they're only qualified to do one thing. And I felt like that. I thought, well, I want to leave, but it's so vocational that the course only prepares you for one job. But that is not true. There's so many things like my job or that lovely supervisor that I said about. She said she had a friend who was now a biology teacher and loved her job. There's so many things. And even if you do something totally unrelated to medicine, to be honest, I was a doctor, I have a medical degree on your CV is going to always go far because everybody knows it's time management, communication, intelligence, ability to work under pressure, like all of those things. If you can get through even like a short period of working as a doctor, I think anything else you come across, it's just never going to be as hard. So you're such a good asset to any role or any business because you've dealt with, being the only person looking after like 100 people at night and someone's having a heart attack and someone's having a seizure. And if you can do that, you can pretty much smash any other role, I think.
I feel like that deserves an applause. No,
But yeah, I really hate people thinking that they're only qualified to do one thing because even if you do something totally unrelated to science and medicine, you have so many skills from both just the medical degree and from the job that would be an asset anywhere.
Exactly. I think if there's one thing if I was to leave to take away from medicine would be that I can now read people quite well. And you've just met loads of people now because you meet 20 people a day.
Yeah.
I guess it sounds bad to be able to judge people, but
No, I know what you mean.
Reading people is definitely a skill. But yeah, thank you so much for your insight. It's been really
welcome.
interesting hearing about it and making me more tempted to live that work from home lifestyle.
Yeah.
But thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. I like helping anyone that is feeling that way because it wasn't very nice not seeing anyone that has made that move and thinking I was the first person to ever leave medicine.
Yeah.
So very happy to help.
Yeah. It's you got out. I was going to ask you any regrets, but I was like, that's a stupid question because obviously no.
Best thing I've ever done. And I always say that to people. And I think less so now because I'm a bit more established in my role and stuff. But at the beginning, I hated telling people, if I went to see a friend, and there were some other people there from med school that I wasn't really friends with, and they'd be like, oh, what are you doing now? And oh, I've actually left. And people were always like, oh, and it was probably my own insecurity, but I always felt like people were judging and kind of saying, oh, you couldn't hack it. Like it always felt a bit pitying.
Yeah.
Whereas I think hopefully now that I really like my job and I'm pretty living my best life,
Yeah.
then I don't think anybody would. But that was one of the really hard things, like people's judgment about it.
Yeah, I remember like when I met you in F1, I was like, or I think it was maybe F2. Oh, yeah, F2. I was like so fascinated. I was like, oh my God, like,
How did you do this?
how?
Help me.